In 1967, a psychologist named Martin Seligman conducted a deeply controversial experiment that inadvertently unlocked one of the darkest corners of human behavior. He placed animals in a specialized cage where a subtle floor grid delivered a mild, unavoidable electric shock. At first, the subjects naturally scrambled around, desperately searching for an escape hatch or a way to jump over the barrier. But because the environment was mathematically rigged against them, every single escape attempt failed. A chilling behavioral shift occurred. The subjects completely stopped fighting. They lay down on the shocking floor, closed their eyes and passively whimpered, accepting the pain as an absolute reality. The truly terrifying realization occurred during the second phase of the experiment. Seligman altered the cage, lowering the physical barrier and leaving the exit wide open. All the subjects had to do to escape the discomfort was simply step across a small visible line, yet they refused to move. Even when the shocks returned, they remained completely passive, staring at the open door to freedom without making a single attempt to cross it. This profound psychological phenomenon is known as learned helplessness. It reveals an unsettling biological law. When a living mind is subjected to repeated failure or prolonged stress, it eventually learns that it is entirely powerless. Over time, it adopts a state of total passivity, convincing itself that struggle is entirely pointless. This exact experiment outlines the invisible prison cell that your own subconscious mind constructs for you every single day. It explains the precise mechanism behind why you stay trapped in situations you have the full power to change. Learned helplessness is the psychological state where an individual ceases to look for escape routes or positive changes simply because past experiences have taught them that they have no control over their environment. When this survival mechanism settles into the human brain, it shifts from an emotional reaction into a permanent cognitive filter. It rewires how you interpret every setback, every challenge, and every goal in your life. To the human mind, predictability is a form of safety, even if that predictability is miserable. When you experience repeated failures, whether in your childhood, your past relationships, or your career ambitions, your subconscious mind stops viewing those events as temporary obstacles. Instead, it processes them as permanent, unalterable laws of the universe. It creates a global belief that says, no matter what action I take, the outcome will always be negative. Once this belief is cemented into your psychological foundation, your brain enters a state of intellectual paralysis. You stop looking for opportunities because you genuinely believe they do not exist. You look at an open door of opportunity and see only a wall. This is not laziness, and it is not a lack of intelligence. It is a profound, automated defense mechanism designed to prevent the pain of future disappointment. Your brain would rather accept a familiar, comfortable state of defeat than risk the emotional agony of trying and failing once again. This is how the subconscious quietly convinces you to stay blind to your own potential, mapping out a life of passive resignation. To understand why the mind surrenders its own agency so completely, we must look directly at the neurobiology of chronic stress and control. When functional brain imaging scans individuals who are trapped in a state of learned helplessness, researchers observe a profound disruption in the prefrontal cortex, the command center responsible for logic, decision-making, and goal-directed behavior. Under normal circumstances, when you encounter a problem, your prefrontal cortex actively designs a strategic solution and sends signals to motivate action. However, when the brain perceives that it has absolutely zero control over a stressful situation for a prolonged period, the neural pathways change. The amygdala, which processes fear and survival, begins to hyperactivate, while the prefrontal cortex essentially goes offline. The brain ceases to produce normal levels of dopamine and norepinephrine, the primary neurotransmitters required to fuel motivation and physical movement. In a very literal sense, your biology pulls the plug on your drive. Your brain enters an energy conservation mode, deciding that burning calories to change your situation is a biological waste of resources because past data says failure is guaranteed. You are physically locked inside an emotional fog, experiencing an artificial state of exhaustion that makes even the simplest positive action feel like climbing a mountain. Your biology enforces your helplessness, transforming a mental belief into a physical weight. When this neurobiological freeze takes hold, the subconscious mind initiates a secondary protective maneuver known as self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is the active subconscious destruction of your own success, your relationships, or your long-term goals. It is one of the most confusing behaviors in human psychology because it appears to directly contradict our desire for happiness. Why would a rational person actively ruin their own progress? The answer lies in the terrifying reality of the ego's comfort zone. Your ego forms an identity based entirely on what is familiar. If your subconscious mind has spent years believing that you are unlovable, unsuccessful, or fundamentally bound to fail, that state of failure becomes your psychological home. Success, happiness, and sudden progress feel like an alien environment. To the subconscious, the unknown is always processed as a threat, even if that unknown is highly positive. When you begin to succeed, when a relationship goes well, a business starts making money, or a healthy habit takes root, your brain experiences a massive surge of internal anxiety. It realizes you are leaving the safety of your familiar, predictable cage. To lower this anxiety and pull you back into your comfort zone, your mind deploys subtle, destructive habits designed to ruin your momentum. It forces you to do something destructive, simply to restore the familiar baseline of defeat. The primary weapon of self-sabotage is a mental process known as self-handicapping. This occurs when an individual deliberately creates an obstacle or a ready-made excuse for themselves before a major performance or challenge even begins. By creating a clear reason for failure in advance, the ego manages to protect its self-esteem from the pain of true rejection. Imagine a person who is handed a massive career opportunity, such as a major job interview or a presentation that could change their entire life. Instead of spending the night preparing, their subconscious mind drives them to stay up late, drink alcohol, or indulge in intense distractions. If they fail the interview the next day, their ego has a beautiful, comforting shield. They didn't fail because they aren't smart enough. They failed simply because they were exhausted. Conversely, if they happen to pass, they look like a genius who succeeded against all odds. Self-handicapping allows you to avoid ever testing your true limits. It ensures that you never have to face the terrifying question of whether your absolute best is actually good enough. Your mind chooses a manufactured failure today over the risk of a real, identity-shattering rejection tomorrow, keeping you safely locked inside a loop of mediocre performance. Alongside self-handicapping, the mind utilizes a secondary, highly passive filter known as selective attention to maintain its helpless state. Once your brain has adopted the narrative that you are powerless, it transforms into an aggressive investigator, hunting for evidence to validate your lack of control. If you try to launch a creative project or start a new business, confirmation bias will force you to fixate entirely on the saturated market, the high failure rates, and the critics who doubt your vision. Meanwhile, it will completely blind you to the thousands of individuals who are successfully making a living doing exactly what you want to do. Your mind ignores the evidence of freedom and exaggerates the evidence of the cage. If someone offers you genuine help or a practical strategy to fix your life, your selective attention will instantly find a flaw in their advice, dismissing it with phrases like, "That works for them, but my situation is completely different." This mental gatekeeper ensures that no new perspectives or opportunities can disrupt your comfortable narrative of victimhood. It allows you to feel entirely justified in your passivity, convincing you that you are a realistic observer of a harsh world, rather than a prisoner of your own distorted perception. These abstract filters manifest in devastating real-world loops, the most painful of which is the cycle of toxic familiarity. This is the precise reason why people who escape abusive or highly chaotic environments often find themselves walking straight into identical situations with different people. From a rational standpoint, someone who has suffered from instability should logically seek out peace and security. However, to a subconscious mind that was raised in chaos, peace feels intensely uncomfortable. It feels unfamiliar, boring, and unpredictable. When a toxic person enters their life, the familiar red flags trigger a profound sense of comfort. The brain says, "I know how this game works, I know how to survive this." The individual mistakes this familiarity for romantic chemistry or a deep connection. They choose a predictable cycle of suffering over the terrifying vulnerability of a healthy, stable relationship. This is the ultimate tragedy of learned helplessness. The mind grows so accustomed to the bars of its cage that when the door is thrown open, it walks outside, feels the vastness of true freedom, and immediately runs back inside the enclosure because the prison is the only place it knows how to navigate. We see this exact same self-sabotage playing out in the destructive cycle of the financial comfort zone. Every human being has an internal, subconscious thermostat for how much wealth, success, and abundance they believe they deserve. This thermostat is set by your childhood observations, your past financial traumas, and your deep-seated beliefs about your self-worth. If your thermostat is set to survival mode, your brain will actively panic if you suddenly accumulate more money than your baseline allows. When a person with this internal setting receives a sudden financial windfall, an inheritance, or a massive bonus, their self-sabotage mechanisms trigger immediately. They experience a subconscious urge to rid themselves of the excess abundance to lower their internal anxiety. They will suddenly indulge in reckless spending, make highly impulsive investments, or neglect their business responsibilities until the excess money is completely gone and they return to their familiar state of financial stress. They look back at their bank account and blame bad luck, corporate greed, or the economy. But the reality is far more profound. Their own mind acted as an automated financial equalizer, burning down their success simply to keep them matching the internal blueprint of who they think they are. When this learned helplessness expands from an individual level to a societal scale, it creates a phenomenon known as systemic cynicism. When generations of communities face economic stagnation, bureaucratic corruption, or systemic roadblocks, the collective prefrontal cortex of that society essentially shuts down. People stop voting, stop organizing, and stop investing in their own communities. They adopt a shared narrative that says, the system is permanently rigged, the powerful always win, and nothing we do will ever change the outcome. This cynicism is the ultimate tool of authoritarian control. The most effective way to subjugate a population is not through physical force, but by convincing them that resistance is entirely futile. Once a society learns helplessness, they become active participants in their own oppression. They will aggressively attack any visionary or reformer who tries to offer a way out, labeling them as naive, foolish, or corrupt. The collective ego of a cynical society would rather tear down anyone who tries to escape the cage than face the agonizing realization that they have spent decades voluntarily surrendering their own power to an illusion. The true danger of learned helplessness and self-sabotage is that they create a perfectly closed, self-fulfilling cognitive loop. The cycle begins with a belief, I'm entirely powerless to change my situation. This belief creates intense neurological anxiety, which forces your prefrontal cortex to enter a state of passivity. Because you are passive, you do not prepare, you do not take risks, and you create ready-made excuses through self-handicapping. This lack of effort predictably leads to an objective real-world failure. When the failure occurs, your mind does not realize that the failure was caused by your own lack of execution. Instead, your confirmation bias highlights the negative outcome and says, "See, I told you so. I knew it wouldn't work out." The failure is used as absolute scientific proof that your original belief was completely correct. Every single loop strengthens the neural pathways of helplessness, making the walls of your mental prison thicker and harder to break. You become the architect of your own defeat, using your manufactured failures as blocks to build a fortress of denial, safely convincing yourself that you are a victim of external circumstances rather than a victim of your own internal programming. Breaking a cycle of learned helplessness requires a systematic, aggressive retraining of your brain's reward networks. You cannot simply think your way out of this trap. You must act your way out. This process begins by understanding the concept of behavioral activation. Because your prefrontal cortex has gone offline due to chronic stress, you cannot wait for motivation or inspiration to strike before you take action. Motivation is a luxury your brain will not grant you while it believes you are powerless. You must force action before the feeling arrives. To do this without triggering the self-sabotage alarm, you must break your goals down into micro steps that are so absurdly small your ego does not perceive them as a threat to its identity. If your brain panics at the thought of launching a new career, do not try to rewrite your entire life today. Instead, focus entirely on sitting at your desk for just 10 minutes to research a single topic. By completing a micro-action and experiencing a small victory, you inject a tiny dose of dopamine back into your prefrontal cortex. You deliver a shock to your system, presenting your subconscious with a single undeniable data point that says, "I took an action, and it changed the outcome." You begin to rewrite the script, one micro-victory at a time. Stepping across the line into freedom is an act of psychological defiance because you are actively fighting against a biological script designed to keep you safe in the dark. Your mind will scream at you to stay passive, to make excuses, and to crawl back into the familiar comfort of your predictable cage. But now that you know the anatomy of the trap, now that you understand how learned helplessness and self-sabotage operate below your conscious awareness, the prison door has lost its lock. You can choose to override the anxiety of the unknown and reclaim your prefrontal cortex. This mastery over your internal programming is a lifelong education, and your brain uses multiple other hidden systems to distort your reality and dictate your daily choices without your consent. If you are ready to explore the rest of these hidden mental traps, understand how your mind fakes the world around you, and discover who is truly making your decisions, click on the playlist on your screen right now. We have built an entire archive of long-form psychological deep dives designed specifically to help you look past the self-delusions of your own subconscious. Click through, explore the library, and break the loops controlling your life.